the permissibility of oral intercourse. What does the Sharia say about oral intercourse? Oral intercourse does come under the gray area that the Sharia is not explicit about between the husband and wife, and we actually do not have a lot of quotations about oral intercourse. The reason being that oral intercourse, generally speaking, was a habit that was frowned upon in most Eastern cultures. And the pre-Islamic Arabs actually also knew of this act, and they considered it to be vulgar and crude, not something that is done by noble people. And it was an insult, and it was the highest insult. And it was an insult for a man to do this because they considered it to be demeaning and vulgar. So by the way, you're not going to find classical discussions in the books of fiqh about oral intercourse. You will find about anal, you will find about so many other things that were known, but you will not find a detailed discussion about oral intercourse because it was not something that was common at all. Now, you will find very, very few references to it, and of those references is some scholars did allow it. The famous Hanbali scholar Al-Qadhi Abu Ya'la, he said that a man may kiss the vagina of his wife before intercourse without karaha, and after intercourse it is makruh. And he said the same applies for a woman, that she may kiss the man's organ with passion. He actually said this, that with passion she may enjoy in the man's organ. But in the Fatawa al-Hindiyya, it says that if a man inserts his penis into his wife's mouth, some have said this is makruh, and some have said that it is not makruh. So we have that reference there. And Al-Qurtubi, the famous Andalusian scholar, he mentions in his tafsir that Al-Asbagh Al-Maliki, the famous earlier Maliki scholar, he says that he quotes from Al-Asbagh, which is one of the classical scholars of the Maliki madhab, that it is allowed for the man, this is explicit, brothers and sisters, it is allowed for the man to lick his wife's organ. يَلْحَسَهُ بِلِسَانِ, it literally says to lick. So we have some very few references that some of our scholars considered it to be permissible. At the same time, a lot of modern scholars considered it to be impermissible, and I can quote you like 5 or 10 that, and this is generally modern fatwa. As I said in earlier books, it's not really discussed, and they bring a number of evidences for this, right? So the first evidence that they bring that it is impermissible is the whole genre of verses that I already quoted in a hadith that approach women, they are your cultivation, approach them from their health, from their field, and they say that the mouth is not an orifice of cultivation. So Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying, approach them from as if they're fields, as if they're cultivation. Now, this is a very weak evidence because by unanimous consensus, it is allowed for a man and a woman to play together with each other's hands until ejaculation is achieved, and a man may ejaculate onto the body of his wife, and nobody will say it is haram, and he will do it intentionally. It does not contradict the verse. So it's a very weak way to refute this. Another thing that they say, that those who make it haram, they say that the mouth is a noble organ, and the mouth does dhikr, and the mouth recites the Quran, and so we should not put our private parts in it. And to respond to this, one can say that that might be a valid point, that it is a noble organ, but it doesn't make it sinful. It doesn't make it haram. You can say that it is discouraged. You can say that, it's not befitting. But to say it is haram is to bring Allah's sin and Allah's maybe wrath or Allah's curse or not necessarily wrath and curse, but you're saying that it is potentially punishable. And the evidence or the notion that the mouth is noble and dhikr is done, well, okay, ghiba and namima is a worse sin than, kissing the organ of your spouse, for example, and it is done by the mouth. So what are you going to do? If somebody does ghiba, we tell him you don't read the Quran. If somebody slanders, does buhtan, we're going to tell him don't do dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now I think one of the strongest ways to actually say that it is makruh, or maybe more than makruh, is to bring up the issue of najasa, and to say that potentially najasa is going to be put into one's mouth. And to respond to this, one could say that the majority of the madhabs, actually 3 of the madhabs, say that semen is not najis. Okay, so 3 of the madhabs actually say that it is not najis. And then one can also respond that by unanimous consensus, a small amount of najasa is overlooked because you cannot, protect yourself. Now, what constitutes small? That is going to be another controversy. And still, I would say that this argument argument of najasa, as we said, it is best to avoid najasa, but in and of itself, touching something najas or of that nature, it's not something that is going to incur Allah's sin. And if it is done for a reason, it is permissible by unanimous consensus, as I explained in the previous question, that a person changes the diaper of their child and that might be najis, or you cleanse yourself and that is najis, so you wash it off afterwards. And it might not be noble, it might not be something that is dignified, but something that is undignified does not become necessarily sinful in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore what I would conclude is that oral intimacy is something that one cannot say is sinful in the eyes of Allah. And I want to quote you fatwa from one of the scholars who gave this with regards to oral intercourse. He said that in conclusion, it has now become clear that oral intercourse is not prohibited, but it is not the normal choice for committed Muslims and Muslimas. It is completely disgusting and does not conform to the pure taste and the decency of a Muslim's personality, end quote. I am sympathetic to this. So it is not haram. You're not going to be sinful, but at the same time, let's try to cultivate haya and try to do that which is the best. Another fatwa from modern Hanafi Sheikh Mufti Ibrahim Desai, he writes that it is makruh because the mouth is not an oracle of najis and because the mouth is used for reciting the Quran and for doing dhikr, end quote. So makruh. I agree with this fatwa that oral intercourse is not haram, but it should be makruh. And if the couple feels that they must engage in this, they really should make sure that najasa is avoided and nothing of that nature is ingested. The default, as I have said, is that it is not haram, it is not sinful, but I'm not giving the green light. It is makruh, and one should strive to one's best to attain a more noble or more purified level. But if one does it, one will not be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by the way, this is something that is above and beyond normal intercourse. So if a woman feels that she does not want to engage in this, the husband cannot force her, because she is required by Islamic law to be accessible for regular intercourse. If there's no other impediments, she is required by our Sharia to allow him to have intercourse with her. She is not required by our Sharia to satisfy every fetish or every desire of his that is beyond that which is mainstream and normal. And so if she finds this issue problematic, she should speak with him and she should not be forced to do something that is above and beyond what is regular intercourse. The two can negotiate what can be done, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best.